There is something about procrastination that most people do not know, but that Jung discovered could be the difference between a life of fulfillment and a life of endless regret. What if the reason you keep postponing that important project, avoiding that difficult conversation, or delaying that life change isn't what you think it is at all? What if the invisible force keeping you stuck has nothing to do with laziness, fear, or lack of motivation, but stems from a much deeper psychological mechanism that Carl Jung identified as one of the most destructive patterns in human behavior? Jung spent over 50 years studying the human psyche, and what he found about our resistance to beginning will shake you to your core. He discovered that every time you say you will start tomorrow, every time you find another excuse, every time you feel that familiar weight of inaction pressing down on your chest, there is an ancient psychological force at work that most people never recognize, let alone understand how to overcome. Before we go deeper into this revelation that could transform your entire relationship with action and achievement, I need you to do something important. If you have ever felt the frustration of knowing exactly what you should do, but somehow finding yourself unable to start, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because what I am about to share with you represents decades of psychological research that could finally break the chains that have been holding you back your entire life. Think about it for a moment. How many brilliant ideas have died in your mind before they ever saw the light of day? How many opportunities have slipped through your fingers while you waited for the perfect moment, the right resources, or the ideal circumstances? How many times have you gone to bed feeling disappointed in yourself, promising that tomorrow will be different, only to wake up and repeat the same pattern all over again? Jung understood that this is not a character flaw. This is not a sign of weakness. This is not proof that you are lazy or undisciplined. What you are experiencing is something far more complex and, once you understand it, far more manageable than you ever imagined. Jung called this phenomenon the tyranny of the provisional life, and it represents one of the most insidious ways our unconscious mind sabotages our conscious intentions. You see, Jung observed that human beings have a peculiar relationship with beginnings. We are simultaneously attracted to and terrified of new starts. We crave change while desperately clinging to familiarity. We dream of transformation while unconsciously working to maintain the status quo. This internal contradiction creates what Jung identified as a psychological paralysis that affects not just what we do, but who we believe ourselves to be. The provisional life is the life you live while waiting for your real life to begin. It is the existence you tolerate while postponing the existence you truly desire. It is the endless preparation for a performance that never comes, the eternal rehearsal for a show that never opens. Jung discovered that millions of people spend their entire lives in this state of suspended animation, always on the verge of beginning, but never quite crossing that threshold into authentic action. But why does this happen? What is it about starting that triggers such profound resistance in the human psyche? Jung's research revealed that the act of beginning represents something much more significant than simply taking the first step toward a goal. When we begin something meaningful, we are not just changing our behavior, we are challenging our entire identity structure. We are threatening the comfortable prison of our self-concept. Every time you consider starting that business, writing that book, learning that skill, or making that change, your unconscious mind interprets this as a potential threat to your psychological equilibrium. The person you have been is known. The person you have been is predictable. The person you have been is safe. But the person you might become through taking action is unknown territory, and the unconscious mind treats unknown territory as dangerous territory. Jung discovered that this resistance operates through what he called psychological complexes. These are autonomous clusters of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that function almost like separate personalities within our psyche. One of the most common complexes Jung identified was the procrastination complex, which he understood not as simple laziness, but as a sophisticated defense mechanism designed to protect us from the anxiety of potential failure, success, or transformation. Listen carefully to what happens in your mind when you think about starting something important. Notice the subtle voice that suggests you should do more research first. Pay attention to the reasonable-sounding arguments about why the timing is not quite right. Observe how your brain generates endless alternatives that seem more urgent or practical. These are not random thoughts. These are the expressions of a psychological complex that has one primary job: to keep you exactly where you are. But Jung also discovered something remarkable about this pattern. He found that once we understand the true nature of our resistance, once we recognize it for what it is, rather than what it pretends to be, we gain the power to work with it instead of against it. The key is not to overcome the procrastination complex through willpower or discipline. The key is to understand its deeper function and provide it with what it really needs. What does the procrastination complex really need? It needs to know that beginning does not mean abandoning everything familiar. It needs to understand that taking action does not require becoming a completely different person overnight. It needs reassurance that growth and stability can coexist. Jung called this process of integration, and it represents one of the most powerful tools for breaking through psychological blocks that has ever been discovered. The first step in this integration process is recognition. You must learn to identify when the procrastination complex is active. This happens through what Jung called conscious observation. Instead of judging yourself for procrastinating, you begin to study the pattern with the curiosity of a scientist. When do you feel the resistance most strongly? What specific thoughts arise? What emotions accompany the avoidance? What physical sensations occur in your body? As you develop this observational capacity, something fascinating begins to happen. The procrastination complex starts to lose its automatic power over you. It is like turning on a light in a dark room. The shadows that seem so threatening suddenly reveal themselves to be ordinary objects. The resistance that felt so overwhelming begins to feel manageable, workable, even useful. Jung discovered that the procrastination complex often carries important information about our deepest values and fears. When we learn to listen to it without being controlled by it, it can become an ally rather than an enemy. It can help us understand what really matters to us. It can guide us toward approaches that honor both our desire for growth and our need for security. This is where Jung's concept of the transcendent function becomes crucial. The transcendent function is the psychological mechanism that allows us to hold opposites in creative tension rather than being torn apart by them. Instead of seeing the desire to start and the resistance to starting as enemies that must fight until one wins, the transcendent function helps us recognize them as complementary forces that can work together to create something new. When you apply the transcendent function to procrastination, you stop trying to eliminate the resistance and start trying to understand its wisdom. You stop forcing yourself to begin and start inviting yourself to explore what beginning might look like if it honored both your growth impulses and your safety needs. This shift in approach often leads to breakthrough insights about how to start in ways that feel authentic and sustainable rather than forced and anxiety-provoking. Now that you understand the deeper nature of your starting resistance, we need to explore how Jung's revolutionary insights can transform this obstacle into your greatest ally. What I am about to share with you represents the culmination of Jung's work on psychological transformation, and it has the power to change not just how you approach beginning, but how you understand the entire process of personal evolution. Jung discovered that the energy trapped in procrastination is not negative energy that needs to be eliminated. It is creative energy that has been misdirected. Think of it like a river that has been dammed. The water is not gone. It is simply accumulating pressure, waiting for a channel that will allow it to flow productively. Your resistance to starting contains enormous amounts of psychic energy that, when properly understood and redirected, can become the very fuel that powers your most important achievements. This concept revolutionizes everything you thought you knew about motivation and discipline. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who lacks the drive to begin, you can recognize yourself as someone who has so much creative energy that your psyche is actually working overtime to contain and direct it appropriately. Your procrastination is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of power that has not yet found its proper expression. But how do you unlock this trapped energy? How do you transform the force that keeps you stuck into the force that moves you forward? Jung developed a specific process for this transformation that he called active imagination, and when applied to procrastination, it becomes one of the most effective techniques for breaking through starting blocks that has ever been discovered. Active imagination involves engaging in conscious dialogue with the different parts of your psyche. Instead of being unconsciously controlled by your resistance, you learn to communicate with it directly. You begin to understand its concerns, appreciate its protective function, and negotiate agreements that allow both safety and growth to coexist. Here is how this works in practice. When you feel the familiar resistance to starting something important, instead of fighting it or giving into it, you pause and begin an internal conversation. You might say something like this: I notice that part of me is resistant to beginning this project. I want to understand this resistance better. What are you trying to protect me from? What do you need in order to feel safe about moving forward? What happens next often surprises people. The resistance begins to communicate, not in words necessarily, but in images, feelings, sensations, and insights. You might discover that your resistance is concerned about failure and needs reassurance that beginning does not require perfection. You might find that it is worried about success and needs to know that achieving your goals will not mean losing important relationships or parts of your identity. As you continue this dialogue, something remarkable occurs. The resistance begins to transform from an obstacle into a guide. It starts offering suggestions about how to begin in ways that address its concerns. It might propose starting smaller than you originally planned. It might suggest a different timing or approach. It might reveal resources or support systems you had not considered. This process exemplifies what Jung called the union of opposites. Instead of the starting impulse and the resistance impulse cancelling each other out, they begin to synthesize into a third option that transcends both. This third option is often far more creative, sustainable, and ultimately effective than anything you could have developed through willpower alone. Jung also emphasized the importance of what he called the symbolic attitude in this process. Instead of taking your resistance at face value, you learn to see it as a symbol of deeper psychological dynamics. The voice that says you are not ready might symbolize a need for better preparation. The feeling that the timing is wrong might symbolize a need to align your project with natural rhythms and cycles. The sense that you lack resources might symbolize a need to develop internal capacities before taking external action. When you approach your resistance symbolically rather than literally, you open up possibilities that were previously invisible. You stop being trapped by the surface content of your procrastination and start accessing the deeper wisdom it contains. This shift in perspective is often the turning point that transforms years of frustration into a breakthrough moment of clarity and action. One of the most powerful applications of Jung's approach involves what he called the principle of compensation. Jung observed that every psychological extreme tends to generate its opposite. The stronger your resistance to starting, the stronger your underlying desire for transformation. The more energy you have invested in avoiding something, the more energy is available for embracing it once you find the right approach. This means that your greatest starting blocks often point toward your most important opportunities for growth. The project you have been avoiding for months or years may be exactly the project that will unlock your next level of development. The conversation you keep postponing may be the conversation that transforms your most important relationship. The risk you are afraid to take may be the risk that opens the door to your most authentic life. Jung called this phenomenon enantiodromia, which refers to the tendency of psychological processes to transform into their opposites when they reach extremes. Your procrastination, when it becomes conscious and integrated, naturally transforms into purposeful action. Your resistance, when it is understood and honored, becomes the foundation for sustainable progress. But Jung also warned about the importance of timing in this transformation process. Forced action that ignores the wisdom of resistance often leads to burnout, self-sabotage, or superficial changes that do not last. Authentic transformation requires what Jung called kairos time rather than chronos time. Chronos time is clock time, the external pressure to start now because the calendar says so. Kairos time is soul time, the internal readiness to begin because the psychological conditions are aligned. Learning to recognize kairos moments is one of the most valuable skills you can develop for overcoming starting blocks. These are the moments when the resistance naturally softens, when beginning feels possible rather than forced, when you sense that the time is right not because someone else says so, but because something inside you knows it is true. These moments often arrive unexpectedly, which is why it is crucial to maintain what Jung called a state of active receptivity. This means staying alert to opportunities for beginning, while not forcing them to happen. It means preparing yourself internally for action, while remaining patient about external timing. It means trusting that when you have done the psychological work of understanding and integrating your resistance, the right moment for beginning will make itself known. The final piece of Jung's approach to starting blocks involves what he called the realization of meaning. Jung discovered that people can overcome enormous obstacles and take tremendous risks when they are connected to a sense of purpose that transcends their personal comfort zone. Your resistance to starting often dissolves when you connect with the larger meaning of what you are trying to begin. Ask yourself what will become possible in the world if you take action on this project. Who will benefit if you overcome your resistance and begin? What legacy do you want to leave, and how does this beginning contribute to that legacy? When you connect with meaning that is bigger than your personal fears and comfort preferences, you access sources of motivation and courage that can carry you through any starting block. As we conclude this exploration of Jung's revolutionary insights about beginning, I want you to understand that everything has changed for you now. You are no longer someone who struggles with procrastination. You are someone who has learned to work skillfully with the complex psychological dynamics that influence human action. You have tools that most people never discover. You have understanding that can transform not just how you start projects, but how you approach every challenge in your life. The path forward is clear. Begin observing your resistance with curiosity rather than judgment. Start dialogue with the parts of yourself that avoid beginning. Look for the symbolic meaning in your procrastination patterns. Wait for kairos moments while preparing yourself for action. Connect with purposes larger than your personal comfort. Trust that your resistance contains wisdom that, once unlocked, will become the foundation for your greatest achievements. Your real life is waiting for you to begin it. The question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you are willing to discover what becomes possible when you work with your psychology rather than against it. Leave a comment below sharing what project or change you have been avoiding, and commit to applying Jung's insights to transform your relationship with beginning. Subscribe for more content that will help you unlock the deepest potentials of your psyche. Your transformation starts now, but only if you choose to let it.